All right, can everyone hear me?
Yep, sure can.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sean, and to the GUGM committee. We want to welcome you today to our presentation, How to Share with Others, ILL Lending Inside and Outside of USG. And Sean just gave all of our intros, but here are your presenters today. Amy Burgers with Dalton State, myself, Rosemary Humphreys with Kennesaw State, Angela Mahaffey with West Georgia, and Emma Kate Morgan at Augusta. We are all members of the GIL ILL subcommittee. And as you can see, we use different systems. Today's presentation is not system dependent, but more general information, whether you use WorldShare, Iliad, or Tapasa, all this information can apply. And our agenda for today is pretty straightforward. Amy will cover some ILL foundational information. Emma Kate is going to review your lending policies. Angela will discuss deflections. I will highlight some differences between copyright and contract in terms of lending. And then we have time set aside at the end for questions and discussions. Feel free to put your questions in the chat as we go along, but we will be answering those at the end. We did want to make one disclaimer, as always, unlike Kyle this morning, we are not attorneys, we are just librarians, and none of the following is legal advice. And we just want you to get from this presentation to be the best lenders and resource sharing partners you can be. And that is going to be different for every institution and every library. And with that, I will pass it to Amy.
Great, thank you so much, Rosemary. And if you could just go to the next slide. I'll be talking about laying the foundation for lending. So some of the considerations that will set you up to lend to others in an ethical way with, little to no complicating underlying foundation. So anyway, the first thing that I wanted to just let you all know about is the existence of interlibrary loan codes. You may be aware of these, but there are the two listed on the screen here with links. And basically we have one for US libraries and one for Georgia libraries. The codes are really informational documents that set out kind of guidelines for practices and behavior relating to interlibrary loan. It also has basic information and definitions in there. So they're interesting to read, but also just important, I think, to be aware of, because they do, although they are voluntarily adopted by interlibrary loan participating libraries, they're just something that kind of guides the behavior. So anyway, the US libraries one is sort of geared toward more generally America broadly. And then we have one specifically for Georgia libraries. So these are updated periodically, and you can see the last updates were from 2016. The goal is that this is a current, up-to-date kind of set of guidelines where, it's encouraging sharing. And there's also an international code. I did not know that. I've never worked at a library that went internationally, but if you do, then that is something worth checking out as well. So just kind of starting off with that. And then Rosemary, if you could go to the next slide. Okay, the next thing that I wanted to talk about was law and copyright. As Rosemary mentioned earlier, we're not lawyers and we're not legally allowed to offer legal advice. However, there are some things I think it's useful to know about when it comes to law and copyright compliance as a lender of interlibrary loan materials. So the first thing is just to ensure that your vendor contracts allow for the use, for the sharing of materials. That would not be copyright law, it would be more of a contract law thing, but it is something that you want to be sure you're not inadvertently violating. So being aware of that. The next thing is borrowers are responsible for copyright adherence. So the Contu guidelines and adherence to those are on the part of the borrower. And then as a lender, you can add copyright material, or sorry, copyright notices to the materials being shared as far as like the photocopying notice and everything. And then lenders can also add additional limitations. So this isn't really a legal thing, but I guess it does refer to any sort of restrictions. So if you personally at your library have additional limitations that you want to add, you can do that as well. So go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so with those more basic nuts and bolts out of the way, I just wanted to talk about some of the foundational partnerships that are really important to being a good lender and setting up your library to encourage the sharing of materials. The first one is with the administration, whether that is your library administration, your department head, or the institution more as a whole. The lending policy that you have, so who's ever in charge of that, that's one area where you would kind of lay out your library's policies, and then you have any restrictions. So some libraries won't lend like audiovisual materials or things like that. So that's one. The next one would be acquisitions. So anytime your library purchases books, ebooks, databases, or journals, they would hopefully be involved and aware of interlibrary loan permissions with the purchase. And that goes back, I think, to the contracts that you guys set up with your vendors. And then the last one is cataloging. So it's really helpful for borrowers if your OCLC records are accurate and up to date. And the cataloging department is going to be your partner in that. So let's go ahead and move to our next slide. And I just wanted to also address contracts. I have a little QR code here for the model clause supplied by RUSA, who also came up with the code that we talked about earlier. And so this is something that you can use when you're negotiating with vendors to set yourself up for success as far as permission for sharing. So their kind of guiding principles for this were standardization across libraries, modernization with regard to the technological possibilities, and then being permissive, so encouraging that sharing of materials. And then the link at the bottom of this slide is going to give you a more detailed sample clause, and then you can see some libraries that are using it and what their experiences have been. So definitely worth checking out. And then let's go ahead and move to our next slide. All right, so now we need to talk about a more practical matter of who is responsible. And all of the stuff that I'm talking about, some of the other presenters will be going into more depth later. So if you're like, oh no, she glossed over that, I'm really doing an overview. So thank you for bearing with me. But when it comes to postage or courier or any sort of like delivery or shipment costs, that would be the lending library who pays. Some libraries do charge if you are in a group such as, so we're in, consortia or sharing groups, and we may have an agreement that we don't charge each other, but if someone from outside of that group borrows, you may have it set up to where you charge them. But in general, the lending library pays for postage. Stickers, staples, and supplies. So the lending library pays for these as well. Tape, that's a big one. And yeah, it's just part of it. I think the idea is that if the lenders always are the ones doing that side of it, then, they don't have to do it when they're the borrower, and it's all kind of a wash. And then finally, lost or damaged items. The requesting library is responsible for those. So if something comes back with a copy stain that it didn't have, or it's lost in the mail or whatever, from the time that it leaves the lender to the time that it returns to the lender, the requesting library is responsible for it. So these are just some basics. I think that everyone here probably has a different degree of experience and familiarity with interlibrary loan. So some of this may be a refresher, but I did want to just kind of address those. And let's go ahead and I think, is this my last slide, Rosemary, or do I have one more?
This is your last one.
Okay, perfect. Well, then I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and we'll turn it over to our next presenter.
All right, so I'm going to talk about the OCLC Policies Directory, and this is used to convey information about your library's lending policies, supplier status, collections, contacts, all that good stuff. So it's important to check your policies to ensure that they reflect not only your current library policies, but also to review that you still agree with them. So when you're analyzing policies, you will check to see like why are you loaning certain books? What does that look like? And how might you make sharing new collections possible? So when you analyze your policies, you can do things like improve request volume, improve your access to your collections for borrowing institutions, and it can even increase your own patrons' access to collections, since there are many reciprocal lending groups that are based on policies such as loan period and stuff like that. So when you're checking and editing OCLC, I just took some screen grabs of some of the most important tabs I'm going to be discussing with this. So what are you sharing with other people is going to be in the profile and the policies tabs. So copies, loans, it's in that summary section too that you see. And then what have you decided not to share and why? And that is under deflections, which Angela is going to talk more about after this. But the deflections are what you don't loan. So you can ask yourself, like, why am I not loaning this? Are you loaning all that you can? Who does loaning this or not loaning this collection benefit and why? So are you not lending a collection for fear of it being lost? Is it just collecting dust on your shelves? An example is if you look at the screen grab here, it says that we at Reed's Library don't loan any of our audiovisual materials, but I've noticed that our CDs and VHS collections don't get used from our patrons with any regularity. So you can ask yourself, is it better that they don't get used but are safe and sound at your library, or is it best that they do get used? And if they still don't get used after permitting them from ILL, it could even be a reason to maybe potentially weed some items like that. And additionally, you can see under the section where it says non-circulating, we have any items located at media services or the curriculum lab. We no longer have any of those parts of the library. So this has not been, I mean, you inherit policies over time and you might not have ever thought about like why those exist or looked into if everything in there should still be there. So, and then there's the how and where to edit. So if you look at these screenshots again, you'll see the little pencil over paper, and that's just how you edit. It's pretty straightforward. So Rosemary, if you please go to the next slide. So with lending groups, these are groups of institutions that have decided to lend reciprocally with other members of the group. So these member libraries will lend books and articles to each other with no cost. So these can be grouped by policies, geographic location, institution type, and things like that. So often joining these groups can help your institution's requests go up, and they can also save your institution money because you might have access to some collections and some resources for free if you're not a library that can do totally free interlibrary loan. Lending groups are a really great option to increase what you can borrow from other institutions. And then loan periods. So loan periods can be used to control the volume of requests that you receive. And so the longer you lend items, the more requests your institution will receive. So at AU, our ILL department is a one-person show. So our short loan period helps keep this number of requests down. So if you want more requests, then you can always increase that. And if you do like 12 or 16 weeks, you definitely get a lot more requests. So Rosemary, if you go to the next slide, please. So this is suspending lending and response time. So you can schedule your holiday closures. This is really convenient because you already know pretty much every year when the libraries will be closed, or for the holidays, or whatever reason you might be closed. You can schedule them all ahead of time. And this will turn off your lending during the set schedule. So there's another option if you need to indefinitely suspend your lending, and this is under the profile section, and that is just turning your OCLC supplier status to off or to no. And you just hit the edit button and you switch that. And then another thing that you can use to control your volume of requests is to mess with your response time. So it has a similar effect as a loan period in that it can help control those requests. And if you're understaffed or stretched thin, increasing response time instead of turning it off completely can be a great alternative, because it will slow down your request volume, but you can still do some lending. So like when our other ILL person left, I swapped our response time from 4 days to 8 just to get me some breathing room. And there are times when I'm out of town and I'm the only person in my institution right now who can do interlibrary loans. So I do that suspending lending a lot. So Rosemary, if you could go to the next slide, please. The last thing I'm going to talk about are conditionals, and a good rule of thumb when thinking, should I conditionalize this request, is when in doubt, conditionalize it. It can slow down the process, but it's often worth the extra time to get clarification or to provide clarification. So why might you conditionalize requests? Well, sometimes the citation is incorrect. I think that anyone who does interlibrary loan has had a situation where you get to the end of a lending string and someone finally tells you that your request was wrong. So it's just a way to be a nice fellow ILL person, saves everyone time. It's a great practice just to let borrowers know as soon as possible about any incorrect citations. There are also some special conditions for lending, like some places do loan special collections items, and you can mark those for in-house, like in library use only. Just letting people know that would be a condition to they're using it, and they can agree or disagree to that. Also, you can let people know that what you charge exceeds the max cost that they have listed, and that might, instead of just flat out saying no because they can't pay, or that says that they have X dollars and you charge Y dollars, it opens a dialogue between the two institutions, and they can decide for themselves once you tell them your cost. And then some places have special shipping requirements. Like it has to be in a box. It has to be sent through a certain mail provider. Like someone has to use FedEx with the Library of Congress. And then sometimes there's not enough information, or you need more information. So some tips when conditionalizing is try to make conditionals yes/no questions. The system's better suited for this, so try to keep that in mind. Sometimes you run out of room for a complex issue that you're conditionalizing. So if you conditionalize it and then send a follow-up email for those situations, that's often helpful. And then just be a good lender. Be the lender that you wish that someone would be for your patron. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it off to Angela.
Thank you. And I'll be discussing OCLC deflections, particularly those related to electronic formats and their impact on interlibrary loan. Since libraries often provide access to digital content, but traditionally did not own it per se, deflections were largely an outgrowth of that. But any conversation about resource sharing is very important to address the issue of deflections, because being a good lender can sometimes be the root of deflections, can sometimes make you a better lender. Rosemary, if you would forward. Okay. Deflections are an OCLC option for lenders. Requests are sent to the next lender in the string automatically if the request matches a deflection rule. The lending library does not receive any requests that meet their deflection rules. So it does not even appear in your queue in any way. It goes automatically to the next lender. Deflections are typically created in 3 locations: the OCLC policies directory, which is usually controlled by interlibrary loan staff, local holdings records, and knowledge-based collections in WorldShare Collection Manager. And the latter 2 may be controlled by or shared with your technical services department, particularly cataloging. Next, Rosemary. Deflections created in the policies directory are applied to the lender stream. So if the library has deflections in place, the request will route automatically to the next lender, as I said earlier. So you will not see that request at all. There are a number of different options for auto deflection, including format and request type. You'll see here some of the other common auto deflections. At our library, the most common deflection affecting our request as a borrower is format type, and typically that is because an item is a digital item. Next, Rosemary. On the left is an example of how to create a deflection in your local holdings records. And the right is a diagram related to the knowledge base in WorldCat Collection Manager, which is for electronic resources. Most libraries are going to have local holdings records. You may not participate in the WorldCat Collection Manager, however. If you do, though, you do have that option of indicating whether you're willing to do interlibrary loan. Both of these, as I said before, are typically maintained by your cataloging department. Deflections created in these areas may not be visible to interlibrary loan staff and may be impacting the request that an ILL office receives. So get to know your cataloging department. Next, Rosemary. Likewise, deflections can be created in WorldShare License Manager, which allows libraries to record their license agreements. Like Collection Manager, License Manager is a paid product that you get from OCLC, so your library may or may not participate in License Manager. When you are creating licenses, you have an option to create ILL terms. Those would be yes, no, and silent. In the case of silent, that means that no terms were chosen, that field was left blank. And so if you leave the license silent, that effectively serves as a no, because there will be no, it will show up as no lending for anything that is silent. And again, these may be maintained by other departments and not visible to ILL staff. Next slide, Rosemary. So what is the result of deflections in interlibrary loan? They have real consequences for borrowers, resulting in requests, particularly for electronic resources that are unfilled and may remain so. Print subscriptions at a lot of libraries may have been replaced by electronic ones, and many titles may be available only in digital formats now. The image on the right shows how deflections appear in the history of an ILL request. So after we have placed a request, we are able to view if the request went from one library to the next. We were actually able to view in the history why it was that the library turned it down. And in interlibrary loan, those are called reasons for no. Recently, we've sent out a request twice. So we sent it out originally with 12 possible lenders. It came back unfilled. So we were able to find another 12 possible lenders. Of the 24 across the 2 requests, 21 deflected the request for format type. This shows you quite clearly what can happen when requests are deflected for reasons like format type, when you have not spent some time in your own policies and with perhaps anyone in technical services or your cataloging department, finding out if indeed you are able to loan from your collections. At one point in our past, when we reviewed our reasons for no lending report, we anticipated that we would not have any results related to deflection, since we do not deflect for any reasons in the policies directory in my institution, and that includes special collections. We do lend and copy from our special collections. And so since we do not deflect, that means every request that is generated with us as a possible lender, we actually do see and we respond to. And we, at this point, we probably loan almost anything from our collection. And like Kate said earlier about evaluating your policies, we do try to periodically go back and make sure that we are communicating to people that yes, we are willing to send out any number of items to possible borrowers. We were surprised to discover that we did have deflections as a reason for no on our report. And that's because deflections had been created in local holdings records and we were unaware of that in our office. And because we do not control the local holdings records, we could not see the deflections. Our serials cataloger made the changes that removes the deflections, and now that is no longer an issue for us. My department is determined to fill as many requests as we possibly can. So we learn from our electronic titles routinely, as our technical services department has always advocated for ILL in our license agreements. I have found in recent times that often it's not even necessary to advocate for ILL. Sometimes that is automatically included in a number of contracts, but definitely make friends with whoever is handling licensing agreements and contracts in your library, so that you can communicate the importance of being able to lend from these collections. As borrowers, we have been unable to fill some requests as all available lending libraries have deflected based on format type, which has very real consequences for our users. Check your deflections. I can't emphasize that enough. Discuss options for ILL with your technical services department. Consider removing deflections for format type when possible to allow for successful borrowing requests. Advocate for resource sharing when the opportunity presents itself so that access to materials is not limited. Reevaluate your policies, particularly during the time that we were remote during COVID and we were still trying to borrow for our patrons. We discovered that many places do actually have the ability to lend from their electronic collections, yet they were unaware of that. And many institutions started investigating what they were able to do. And if anything, that is the one great outgrowth we have had for resource sharing, that many people were willing to start thinking about things like deflections and format type and pushing the boundaries of what it was possible to lend. And so I hope that everyone will continue to think about that and also think about making friends with the other parts of your library that will help you open up this door for both your lending to other people and for you as a borrower as well, so that you do not face this kind of situation when you are trying to help your own patrons. And with that, I will hand it off to Rosemary.
All right, thank you, Angela. So when figuring out what you are allowed to lend, so you've analyzed your policies and you're like, I want to lend all of this stuff. You still need to figure out whether copyright or contract terms apply. And I'm going to start with the easiest one, which is just physical loans. Kyle Courtney this morning did an amazing job and much better and much more eloquently probably than I can put a lot of this stuff. But physical loans is governed by Copyright Code Section 109, which includes the first sale doctrine, which allows the owner of a legal copy of a copyrighted work to display, lend, sell, or even dispose of that copy without permission of the copyright owner. So it's really up to your institutional policies whether you loan physical items, whether that's bound journals, microfilm, your popular reading collection. As Angela stated, they even loan from their special collections. Now, ebooks is obviously a completely different story. Loans are governed by your license terms as well as some technological limitations. And there have been some advancements with subscription products like Occam's Reader, which allows libraries to upload ebooks for a limited time to other libraries. Some consortia, such as Viva, which is the Virginia consortia, have negotiated with certain publishers the ability to send entire PDFs of a whole book, of a whole ebook. And while whole ebook lending is probably not likely a default term in your current licenses, the ability to send chapters may be. So, and actually some of the ebooks that are available through GALILEO allow the ability to send chapters from them. So please look into that. While sections 107, 108, 109 of the Copyright Code do allow libraries to have those magical lending superpowers, there are still certain criteria that need to be met, and I did want to just point out a few of them. The first one's really easy because we're all public state institutions, so we're public institutions that are open to the public and unaffiliated researchers. And then some other things that need to be met is that copies cannot be made for commercial purposes, that it's not systematic in nature, and that you have to include a copyright statement with the material that you're providing. And at the bottom of the slide, I did provide a pretty straightforward, simple statement that you can include, which is this material is subject to the US copyright law, and that further reproduction and violation of that law is prohibited. Now, copies from physical items, I think we mentioned this a little bit earlier, but keeping track of Contu is the responsibility of the borrower, and they need to indicate whether it's CCL or CCG on the request. But it's still important for you as a lender to have an internal policy in place for your library on copy limits. And this really is up to your institution. Are you going to say that how many chapters or articles per volume or book? Is it a percentage? Is it 5% of a book, 15% of a book? Or is there a page limit? Some people just do a flat 50 pages max. What you decide is sometimes influenced by your staffing and your workloads, as well as what your institution considers to be a small portion of the work. For copies from electronic resources, it's been mentioned throughout this presentation, is know your license terms. The contract takes use. I kind of look at it as a yes, a restriction, a no, or silent. When you're looking at them, and pay attention to the restrictions, because they will allow, some contracts allow ILL, but only in certain conditions. So sometimes the library you're providing it to has to be non-commercial, it has to be academic. They may not allow electronic sending, so they may require you to print out a copy and mail it. When that is in your terms, please conditionalize that. Don't just send a article by mail and say that you've supplied it, and then the other library that's thinking it's getting an electronic copy really fast is waiting a week before the US mail gets there. And then there's other restrictions. I've seen some contracts that actually do want the lenders to keep track of their usage and what they're sending out. So while it is the responsibility of the borrower to keep track of what they're requesting, sometimes your contract may actually want you to keep track of usage as well. And here are just some example clauses that I've pulled from different sources. And again, some are very straightforward. The first one says, you shall not provide any material to fulfill an interlibrary loan request. That's a pretty clear no. The middle one is one of those where it's a yes, but, and so it does have the single paper copy of an electronic original. And then it also includes a not for commercial use statement as well. And then the last one is not quite the RUSA model one, but it is very open and permissive, just stating that you are providing it within the provision of Section 108 of the Copyright Act and the Contu guidelines. And if you haven't looked at your into your licenses and you have no idea where to start, Gil and Galileo has actually helped you out and helped you get started. And they've actually included the license terms for Galileo databases in Gilfind. You may have noticed probably about 2 years ago now that the show license link showed up in the catalog, and you can click on it and it will actually tell you what is permitted. And so for this one, it says interlibrary loan allowed with restrictions. And then the restriction or the note is that it's allowed as long as it's not prohibited by the publisher and the copyright statement. And so this was a joint project with the Gil Acquisitions Committee and the ILL Committee. And we're very thankful that they, one, advocate for ILL permissions, and then two, that they were able to put it inside of Primo. So getting a handle on your electronic terms can be a project, depending on how they are stored, where they're stored, who controls them at your library. Do you have to go through one or two people to actually even get to see them? And the goal is not to deflect all electronic resources, because more and more vendors are allowing ILL lending. And we also want to encourage you to advocate for ILL, to be the best resource sharing partner you can be. Befriend your acquisitions team, befriend who negotiates your contracts. They won't know to care about ILL terms unless you tell them why it's important that they care. Amy discussed the model clause from RUSA earlier in the presentation. I did want to put it on here. I like it. It's very straightforward. It's permissive, so it allows us to do what we want to do. And it also has a reference to the prevailing technology of the day, which means that you won't have to go back later and remove language such as Arial, which was a pre-Odyssey and pre-article exchange way of sending material electronically. And also, many contracts are just renewed year to year without really updating the terms. And the wording that's to the right on the slide is wording that was still in contracts that I looked at not too long ago. And while you know, not many people still have a hard disk or diskette or even a reader for those, or not many people are still using dial-up by a telephone link. So it is good to just review things from time to time and have those discussions with your acquisitions and technical services teams. So likely, I've recognized several names in the participant list. You may have known most of what we covered, but even if you have been an ILL practitioner for years, it's always good once in a while to review the guidelines. The ILL code for the national code is getting updated this year, and which means the Georgia code will be updated after once that gets published. Review your policies. Ask why they are the way they are. Has something changed in your library that they could possibly be more open? Double check your deflections, double check your reasons for no, and make sure so no one has added something that you weren't aware of. Know your license terms, and I think just this whole presentation is advocate, advocate, advocate for ILL to be the best lender you can. And do remember that it is individual for your own institution. You can only do what you are able to do at your institution, but see if you can do more. We thank you for your time, and we're now going to open up the session for questions and discussion. Feel free to unmute yourself if you are able. And here is our contact information in case you want to reach out to any of us directly afterwards. And I'm just looking through the chat, and yes, Melissa, staples and stickers are evil. And that is actually in the national code, that you are not to use staples in mailing, and that you are not supposed to put stickers on other people's materials.
One thing we did was follow Emery's example. We put paper bands on all of our books. And so if somebody has to use stickers, they can just put it on the paper band, and that way they get what they want and we get what we want, which is for our book not to be damaged.
That is a good suggestion, and I will, if I can, start my video. There we go. Hello. Does anybody have any thing that would make a good lender that we did not cover? Oh, Mary asked, is the 5, I'm guessing it's the 5-5-5 rule. Would that be the the suggestion of five articles published within the last 5 years. Yeah. So that is Contu, and that still is in place. It is a guideline. It's not a law. And if you attend tomorrow's session, Reagan, I think it's at 11, but someone check the schedule.
I will check.
There is a presentation on someone on Georgia State is
11 a.m.
looking to move away for that. Yep.
It's called Farewell to Contu.
Yes.
The one thing I would have added, not so much to be a good lender, but a resource for new ILL librarians, join the Iliad workflow kit listserv and the ILL listserv. God knows we love to answer questions.
Yes.
And we are a great resource for a new librarian who isn't sure of what to do in a certain situation.
I would also add the ILLers Facebook group if you were a Facebook person.
Yes.
As well.
As a general rule, ILL people, pardon the pun, love to share in many ways. And I know over the years we have at our institution, we've helped a lot of people get their feet and get up and running with their operation. Particularly if there's no one in their library who's still there, who has done interlibrary loans. So I do encourage anyone who finds yourself lost in that way to feel free to just pick someone in your system, someone in your consortial group, and say, hey, could you just help me out? Can I call you? Can we email? Anything like that? And could you just give me some hints on what to do? And I would be surprised if anyone said no.
With that, there's also the G2 ILL listserv, which is the USG ILL list, which isn't, it goes through periods of busyness, but it's a good place to ask questions, specifically if you want to know something that maybe other USG institutions are doing.
And I also wanted to second about deflections being very careful. A couple of years ago, despite having many years experience in this job, I tried to deflect our special collections books from ILL and accidentally deflected all of our books from ILL. And it took me 3 months to figure this out. So yes, if you set deflections, please review them periodically to make sure there are no unintended consequences. I learned that lesson the hard way. The reason for no report is what finally clued me in. And you can get that off the OCLC stats page.
I'll give another minute or so for questions.
I just popped the link to the stats page in chat. You can get some interesting stuff. One thing we use it for is collection development. If we notice the same book going out over and over again, that's a sign that we need to either buy an electronic copy so that our patrons have access when the physical book is gone, or that we might want to consider buying another copy. Or if we notice that I've borrowed from the same journal 32 times, we really need to look at getting a subscription. Granted, that's never, the number's never been that high, but that is one thing we use it for.
All right, I'm not seeing anything else coming in. So on behalf of myself and Amy and Angela and Emma Kate, we thank you for joining us today. Like I said before, we are members of the GIL ILL subcommittee. It is an open committee. So if you are interested in joining or want to know more about what we do, please email any of us and we can answer those questions and would happily take new members in the new cycle. And Sean, I think we can stop the recording.